now ready to start our second homecoming recipe, the porcupine meatballs. Our recipe calls for 1 pound of ground beef, and you want to use a good ground beef, like a sirloin is a wonderful choice. We're going to use a half a cup of water with 2 eggs, and I've already put those together. A half a cup of rice. You can either use brown rice or white rice. With the rice, the brown rice you'll have to cook a little longer. We're going to be using it today, but the recipe is actually for the white rice. If you use brown rice, you'll need to cook it just a little longer so that your rice is cooked through, clear through. We're going to put in a fourth of a cup of onion, chopped onion, a teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of garlic, and a quarter of a teaspoon of pepper. Now let's get started because this is a wonderful recipe. We're going to take a fork and lightly mix up our eggs and our half a cup of water. And it doesn't have to be mixed real well, but you really need to get the yolks broke up. And you're going to pour that into on top of your ground beef. And set that aside. Now we're going to measure a half a cup of the rice. And you can just dip that right down in there. And when you measure dry ingredients, you need to use a dry measuring cup, which is something that looks similar to this one. And use a level-edged utensil to level off the top so that you get the right amount. And you're going to pour that on top of your ground beef and your egg and water mixture. And then it calls for a quarter cup of chopped onion. I'm going to show you how to chop this onion up. And we're not going to chop it all the way, but if you cut your onion in half, that is very helpful. And this kind of makes slices down your onion, because many people like their onions chopped up pretty fine. And so if you do it this way, it chops it up really fine. Now some people like their onions a lot chunkier, and you can make it however you want. And you just slice it down like that. And it makes nice fine chopped pieces of onion for you to use in your recipe. So we're going to add our quarter cup of onion, our teaspoon of salt. And if you're on a restricted kind of a diet that you shouldn't have so much salt, you can actually put less salt in. A quarter of a teaspoon of garlic powder and a quarter of a teaspoon of pepper. This is a real tasty recipe, that's for sure. Now we're going to mix this up. And it takes a few minutes to mix this up. And some people, when they make porcupine meatballs, they actually use their hands. And that's okay. If you want to use your hands to mix this up, you can go right ahead and do that. Just some suggestions I have for you. And that would be, first of all, be sure your hands are washed. That's very important. You need to remove all rings. Make sure you don't have any fingernail polish on or anything like that, because that's really important to make sure your fingernails are clean, because you can spread a lot of germs underneath fingernails. So you mix this really well. Couple little pieces of information I want to tell you about. When you have homecoming events, it's important to keep cold food cold and hot foods hot. Now, hot foods need to be kept at 140 degrees or higher, and cold foods need to be kept at 40 degrees or lower. Now, many times when you're at a picnic or any kind of homecoming event, you may have large portions of food. You may only want to put out a small amount during the serving and put out more during when it's needed, and try to keep the foods either hot or cold, whatever they're supposed to be. Our meatballs are really starting to come together really well here. You want to make sure that your meat is all mixed up in this particular recipe here. And if you really like more onions or whatever, you can actually gauge this, whatever your taste is. You can make this to meet the needs of your family or your friends that will be coming to your home. Okay, I think it's mixed up pretty good at this point. We're going to move this aside and bring our dish over. And what I like to do, you can either use your hands or you can use a scoop to make your meatballs. And if you use a scoop, you just kind of put it in the scoop and kind of pack it in there a little bit. And then you put it in your pan. So a nice meatball, and you might need to shape it a little bit. And this recipe will make 9 nice meatballs. And this scoop is it makes 1.5 inch meatballs, and that's your serving size. Now this recipe, we're going to talk about it a little later, but it's going to bake. And I want to talk a little bit about if you're going to warm up leftovers. And if you're warming up leftovers, because many times when you have large groups, you're going to have leftover food. And so if you have leftover food, be sure you store it properly in the refrigerator. But when you warm it back up, you need to make sure that it's warmed back up to at least 165 internal temperature. And that's why it's really important to have a meat thermometer in your home. And I'll show you that a little later. When you're thinking about planning meals for your homecoming events, your holidays, whatever that you're having friends and family come over, you need to think about a few things. Think about the texture of your food. Think about the colors that you're serving up with your menu. Think about the nutritional value, all those kinds of things when you're planning this meal. Because nobody likes to eat a meal that's pretty bland or it's all the same texture. So you could have the snack that we had made earlier along with these meatballs, and that would be great because you have a crunchy texture. And when meatballs come out, they're not quite as, they're kind of nice and soft inside. And we have one more meatball we're going to make up here. As you can see, it comes out to 9 nice meatballs. There we go. And now we're going to make the sauce for our meatballs. And with our sauce, it takes 1 can of tomato soup, 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, and a 1/2 cup of water. And what you do, you're going to put this all in one bowl. And it's so much better to make things from scratch versus buying. You could buy a barbecue sauce or some type of tomato sauce to put on this, but it's so much more economical to make your sauces. And besides, your family likes it a lot better because they're like, oh, I want that recipe. So it makes you feel good when you make things yourself. And so you stir this up. It may look a little funny at first, but once you get it mixed up, it really looks good. And then we're going to pour this on our meatballs once we get it stirred here. And there's many types of tomato soups that you can buy, and you want to buy just the regular small can of tomato soup. Okay. This recipe, the meatballs seem to be a little more moist than a lot of recipes that you might make, but when they come out, they're really tasty. You're going to pour this tomato sauce right on top of your meatballs. They're looking yummy already. And then we're going to take our foil. I want to talk a little bit about the foil. Foil has 2 different sides. It has an unshiny side and a shiny side. When you're baking, you're going to want the unshiny side up because the shiny side actually reflects all the heat. Now our porcupine meatballs are ready to put in the oven. As I said, they will go in the oven for 45 minutes with the foil on, so covered. After that 45 minutes, you still leave the oven at 350 degrees, but you remove the foil and let it bake for another 15 more minutes uncovered. So now we're ready to put our meatballs into the oven. And here's our porcupine meatballs after they've come out of the oven. Don't they look scrumptious? Your family will just love them. As I talked about before, your meatballs need to measure an internal temperature of 165. So what you do is you take your meat thermometer and stick it into your meatball and let the temperature get up to 165. You do not put it all the way down to the bottom because the pan will be warmer than the internal temperature of the meatball. So you put it in the meatball and let it make sure that it's 165. If it is not 165, you want to put it back into the oven and bake it for a little bit longer. Well, these are two wonderful recipes that you can try for your homecoming events when your friends and family come over to your home and want to have a wonderful celebration. You'll feel so proud of yourself because you made the food yourself versus having food brought in or whatever, and it's a lot more economical. I sure do hope you enjoy your next family or friend celebration.